Welcome back to Shooting the Bull. I'm Ken Hendricks. I want to talk to you in a more serious tone today about building your farm as a business. Now, I love small farms, and I want everybody to start one tomorrow. I think if every person made it their goal to start a small farm business tomorrow, the world would be a better place. To do that, we have to make farming, and specifically small farming, we have to make it a few things. One, we have to make it viable. You cannot do this thing and it not be sustainable for the person doing it, whether that means financially sustainable, relationally sustainable, land sustainable. All of that has to be available and functioning for people to be able to get into the sphere of small farming and agriculture. The second thing we have to do is we need to make small farming sexy again. And when I say sexy, I don't just mean like in looks, but it needs to be something that's not just rooted in commoditization. Like, we're not just making widgets here with cattle. And anybody that's raised cattle for very long, it's easy to get trapped into this mentality that we are just making widgets. Let me just start you with a story and see if you identify with it. Work super hard, put up hay, cut hay, rake it, roll it, store it, haul it, put it all up, feed hay all winter. Get up cows, them trying to kill you, escaping, keeping them in the fences, repairing fences every other week, sometimes every other day, getting calls in the middle of the night from the local police force asking you to come put up the animal that's out in the middle of the night, working those cattle, vaccinating, deworming, treating them, calling the vet when they're sick and when they're having trouble having a calf, burying them, and then raising those babies up only to take them to the local sale barn and then bring the absolute lowest dollar that people can possibly pay for them. I don't know if you feel that way. That's been my story a lot of times. I've culled some of my best cows at times when they brought 40 cents a pound and I got $400 simply because the market crashed. That quickly makes farming not very sexy. And it's easy to blame the packers, and it's easy to blame the market, and it's easy to blame all those things, and that's not the point of the story, because every market has crashes and bubbles and busts. The problem is, when those things happen, they reveal the status of my farming operation. And the number one thing that's always revealed is that I've allowed my product of animal to become a commodity and not a value-added service. See, it's easy for cattle to be treated like commodities. They get traded like commodities on Wall Street. But my animals are not the same as your animals. And my animals aren't the same as every other animal that goes into that sale barn. But when they run through that ring, that buyer doesn't know anything about me, doesn't know anything about my program, and doesn't know anything about what I've put into that animal. What he does know is what he sees from the animal in the ring. And if it's been some bad weather and they're a little muddy, if it's just an off day in the market, maybe he just doesn't have as many orders to fill today, then I don't get any return on all the extra things I did to make my animals better. So then I feel this pressure that I've got to produce better and got to be better and got to get bigger and better animals. So then what do? Well, I look at the way the big boys do it. They're running 1,200, 1,500, 10,000 head of cattle, sometimes way more than that. And I try to emulate what they do. I either chase numbers on paper or I get certain breeds of bulls, but I'm a small farmer. For me, I've got 150 head of cattle. Maybe yours is even smaller than that. Maybe you've got 20, 30, 40 head of cattle. That is simultaneously your biggest strength and your biggest weakness depending upon how you operate. And if you're trying to operate like those other guys, I guarantee you're going to fail. Because you can't spend enough money, you can't do enough projects, and you can't build enough pieces into a small organization and imitate somebody else's strategy to have success. Because if you don't know who you are and you try to put on somebody else's tools, you end up in a mess. The Bible talks about it with Saul and David goes to fight Goliath, and Saul is there, and he's killed his thousands, right? He's done everything he's supposed to, and so David takes the armor and puts it on, and he doesn't know how to operate that way because he's a small guy. He's used to a little flock of sheep, and the armor's too big for him. It doesn't work. Well, in the same way, if you're trying to be Gardner Angus Ranch and you're a little guy in northeast Georgia, Nothing about your two operations are the same. So functionally, we have to determine who we are in the cattle industry. So who are we? Well, there's lots of things that get passed down. A lot of times we don't know who we are. We just had it handed to us, and we've accepted cattle farming the way it was handed to us because there was really a lot of good things about it. That's what happened with me. My grandfather was a cattle farmer. My father was a cattle farmer. We did certain things certain ways. That's the way we'd always done it. 70 years ago when my grandfather first was getting into it, those things made sense. They made him money. But the market 70 years ago and the market today, and when I say market, I'm not just talking about the Wall Street market, the trading market. I'm talking about the landscape of the cattle industry is entirely different now than it was 70 years ago. 70 years ago, you could easily rent land, stick a few fences up on it, and make more off the animals than the land would ever require or burden you, so that it was profitable. But now I've got land that I have cows on that's $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 an acre land if I turn around and sold it tomorrow. How am I going to produce enough animals when it takes about an acre and a half to even get one animal up each year? How do I produce enough for it to be valuable to keep cows on that land? It takes redefining who we are and knowing who we are and what we're trying to do. Now, here's the thing. Vision is being able to look at the cattle industry and see the battlefield, if you want to look at it that way, as it's laid out in front of you. Being able to see where the troops are positioned, where your troops are, what strengths you have, and what the enemy's strengths are, or where the market's strengths and weaknesses are. It's easy to get bogged down into just looking at all the problems with the market. The sweetheart deals that go to these big ranches that we're talking about, there's problems inherent in that, and you have an advantage as a small farmer for being able to deal with that. And you know what that advantage is? You're small. Small is big. Being able to be small means you're lightweight. You can move quickly. But if you're building yourself to be heavy, you're giving up all the strengths of being small. You're giving up the ability to shift and move your cattle quickly. And when I say move your cattle, I'm talking about not just move them in a pasture, but I'm talking about moving the core of your business to a very specific niche market so that you win at the end of the day. The way the cattle industry was handed to me was about raising commodity cows, that the commodity I sold at the local sale barn would bring plenty of money because the commodity was strong, that it would pay for the operation that I'm doing. But now the commoditization, because of the vertical integration of the entire cattle industry, from the beef retail product all the way down to the babies being born, they're trying to vertically integrate more and more and more and more and more of that. We can sit here and rail against it, but it's going to happen. You know what? I'm all in favor of legislation and different things that can slow that down and move us in the right direction. That's fine, but what I have to recognize is the market is what the market is. And because it is what it is, there are opportunities available in the niches that the big guys can't hit. They don't want to hit them. They don't want to focus on them. They like making big, sexy, strong cattle that have sweetheart deals that make big money when they sell to JBS. But at the end of the day, customers create tons of spaces in a market that feels plastered like that. So if this sounds deep, just hang with me. We're going to talk about a lot of different things to be able to focus in and how to be lightweight and how to know who you are as a farm to be able to be successful. Until we get the up part of like who we are, then the stuff we do gets really confusing because we do things to try to be somebody else. We do things to try to be like Gardner Angus, but it's not me where I am. It's not who I am. It's easy to want to create the ideal market. Like, oh man, I just hate these cattle that have these gigantic numbers that are super inflated and don't tell the real story about the animals. But people are paying stupid money for numbers. The market is what the market is. So there's the ideal animal that is the best animal we can possibly produce, but there's also the market reality that people are paying stupid money for high number animals, high EPD animals. Between this and the ideal is opportunity. But if you just keep trying to be the ideal forever and ever and ever, but the market's not worried about the ideal, the market's over here, you've totally missed the point because you're not adding value where people want value added. You're just trying to do what's always been done and produce what's always been produced. And while I applaud you for upholding the ideal, that's not sustainable unless you have already made it. Like the big guys that already have tons of customers and tons of money and all those things, they're a battleship. They can handle the waves of losing out a little bit on some of the big stuff, or in fact dragging some of that back to the ideal. But if you're small and lightweight, you're not able to do that. But what you can do is you can navigate through this opportunity space in the middle and you can win. How do we win as small farmers in the cattle industry? One, by knowing who we are. If we know who we are, then we know what we produce. Well, why does who we are matter? I mean, isn't it eventually all just about the cattle? Aren't the cattle what makes the money? No. If you make it all about the cattle, you've already stopped your entire farm organization at being a commodity. And a commodity means that you are subject to only creating and only accepting what the market gives you. You can't add any value to those cattle except by getting them fatter, bigger, and stronger. That doesn't even always correlate to the animal as it runs through the ring. The guy down the road who doesn't take care of his animals very well, who's just kind of a hobbyist, he checks on them once or twice, 3 times a month, he's going to get just as much for a decent animal that runs through the barn as you do. If you're out there every day, working your tail off, checking them, tagging them, putting everything into them, your cattle technically are better cattle. They've been better cared for, but people don't see that when it runs through a ring and it's treated as a commodity. You know what people will pay for? They'll pay for value that you add to what they want to do and to who they are. But most cattlemen are so busy, especially on the small farmer side, doing farming as it's been handed to them, that they spend all their time working in their farm and almost no time working on their farm. How to make their farm better. How to fill this opportunity space between ideal and the market. How to produce something that's sustainable with your conditions, with your setup. Sustainability is not about being eco-friendly or not. Not in the 50,000 foot view that people want to make it about. Sustainability is about being able to recognize the resource that you have and continue to produce within the means of that resource at an effective level that you can sustain that over time. So sustainability, yes, you do need to recognize the eco side of it because that's a huge part of it in some ways. Farmers are some of the biggest eco-friendly people in the world because we recognize the healthier our pastures are, the healthier the ecosystem is that we put those animals in, the better they produce, right? But we also have to recognize the ecosystem in Northeast Georgia and the ecosystem in Ashland, Kansas are completely different. I mean, Montana cattle need entirely different things than cattle in Northeast Georgia. I mean, I'm growing cattle on like 1.5 acres per head. It's an entirely different world. It's an entirely different ecosystem, literally. And in the same way, the ecosystem isn't just about your grass. It's about all your resources, your time, your relationships, your energy, your land availability, the ecosystem of your local community. All those things play a role in determining how can you create a small farm that adds value sustainably to what you see as the opportunities in front of you or the vision you see of the market in your area. And remember, the market is not the livestock barn where you drop your cattle off. The market is everybody that buys cows. The market is people that don't buy cows but like looking at your pictures of your babies. The market is the homestead people that want one cow that they can milk. The market is the guy that likes to eat at Ruth Chris in Atlanta and get delicious steak that's locally raised. The market's also your local business down the road who's having to spend way too much money to buy steaks right now because he doesn't have or know that you have local cattle that are even better than what he can buy. The market is out there. What's not out there is you treating your farm as being marketable And so we spend a lot of time growing, raising cattle that we then give away as a commodity. So we add all this value and then treat it like it's not a value added product because we're good at farming, but we don't know much about marketing. And at the end of the day, cattle is about the cattle market, and it's easy to just do what we've always done and get our identity from the way it was handed to us. And instead of knowing who we are, what we want to do, and what our world wants to look like. And when I say our world, I'm saying, how much time do you have each week to put into cattle? I mean, do you got kids in soccer? Is that important to you to be able to go to those things? Do you need to spend every waking moment making hay and wrapping it? Maybe you do. There's nothing wrong with hustling hard and working your butt off. Like maybe that's 100% who you are. I've lived that life. It's not 100% who I am. I can't live that way inside and out because it's not who I am authentically. I burn out. I need to be able to push and do different things. But I'm also one who gets scared of the marketing side. The insecurity of rejection, people rejecting your animals are partially rejecting you. I get scared of promoting my animals because really what I'm trying to sell isn't my animal. What I'm trying to sell is who I am. I'm trying to sell that the way I raise my cattle, the way my family interacts with this small farm, the way I build things adds value to you as my buyer. I'm not selling them just my cattle. I'm selling them me and my process and my way of farming. And if I don't know how to market myself because I don't know who I am, then I'm not going to be able to market my cattle with value added. Sure, I can use somebody else's system of value added. Yeah, they've been weaned 60 days and they've been on feed and they've had these shots and this and that. You're still getting a very low premium. It's still pretty much treating them like a slightly value added commodity. But if I want to raise replacement heifers, the way I add value to that is by selling myself that, yes, I have commercial heifers, but they're not common heifers. In the past 10 years, I put nearly $100,000 into bulls. Your average commercial guy doesn't do that. That's who I am. I'm not saying you should do that because that may not be your setup or what you're supposed to be doing. That's mine. That's who I am. That's the ecosystem I'm in the middle of, and it's what I want to create. You know what? Doing that, I messed up a lot. I've made huge errors and mistakes and wasted money, and I've been the guy trying to be somebody else. I've chased rotational grazing, and it works great when I can do it, but I've also wasted money buying equipment that didn't work out. I watched some video on YouTube and it made a lot of sense. I'm not the guy that can go out there and move my cows 6 times a day. I can't just give up all tractors and go to totally farming by 4-wheelers. I am not condemning their method or who they are. I'm saying it's not who I am. And if you don't know who you are, you'll chase who somebody else is, and your farm will die because of that. Small is big and slow is fast. If we can slow down trying to chase every last thing and be able to filter that into, this is who I am, and because it's who I am, I'm going to do this thing, and I'm going to make sure I get this thing done. I think you'll see radical change in your farm, and I think you'll see some radical success. When we have a vision of what the cattle industry looks like and we can see our areas, and when I say cattle industry, I'm talking about the entire market, like everything. When we see our local ecosystem and we have good vision of that, and sometimes that requires getting out of the farm, like getting out of doing daily chores and showing up. Sometimes it takes finding a way. In World War I, one of the big advantages that the French finally got over the Germans was they got air superiority, and they started using hot air balloons behind the lines to be able to actually look at where defensive units were laid out, where the Germans were entrenched and encamped. So when they began to then make missions to go and take new things, they knew what to expect and what to encounter. In the cattle industry, we rarely do that. We don't know how to take and assess what's around us and get a 50,000-foot view of the way the battlefield's laid out in front of us. Not the way it's laid out in front of some guy in the Midwest, if that's not where I am. But where's it laid out in a little rural small town, northeast Georgia, right? How do I look at that for me? How do you look at it in your context and be able to recognize the opposition, the strengths you have, the positions, the layout of the land around you, all those kinds of things to be able to add value and then be strategically mission oriented. So I see this vision in front of me. I see a vision of how I want it to change in my area or where I can do something. And then I take a very specific mission that our small, lightweight farm is going to be able to move strategically into this place that we see in front of us and accomplish the mission through effort and hustle and wise decisions to be able to accomplish what we're aiming at. But if we spend all our time working in our farm and never working on our farm, that won't ever happen. You'll just continue to do what you've always done, and you'll continue to make commodity cows that you have to be at the mercy of someone else buying your animals. You have to be at the mercy of the market because they're not buying you, they're just buying the animal that runs in the ring. You're completely separating you and your process from that animal. I'm not against livestock auctions, but recognize that a livestock auction is not there to add value to your animal, because in no way they're not going to sit up there and say, oh, this is so-and-so's cows. Not if you've got 3 or 4 head there. I mean, maybe if you're selling a string of 50 or 100 animals at one time, they might say, oh yeah, well, these animals came from such and such farm, But even then, if people don't know who that is, they don't know anything about it. So I got a task for you that I want you to be able to do. I would like for you to be able to sit down and write down, this is what our farm does. These are the kind of cattle we make. And I want you to basically make a marketing brochure, write down, why should I buy your cattle? And there's no right answer here. I will tell you that there's a lot of wrong answers, but there's not one right answer. Be able to define that, be able to write that down and be laser focused. And then what you can do is you can look and say, okay, which animals, which processes, which pieces of our organization don't do that. And then don't do that. Get rid of them. Swap them out. If those animals don't move you closer towards that goal, that specific goal of this is who we are and this is why people should buy my cattle, if those cattle don't fit that, then you shouldn't produce those cattle because it's not who you're wanting to be or who you are. Some of these registered guys have nailed it down. Like, I produce the best phenotype, highest numbered cattle in the Angus industry. And if you want to be on the cutting edge of that, that's who I am. But that's not for everybody because that requires a lot of investment. To be able to do that, you need to know AI and ET, and you need to be able to spend $150,000 on a donor cow, and you need to be able to go buy the $1,200 semen and all this kind of stuff to be able to produce those animals. But that ain't me. That's not what my system or my setup is for. And if I try to chase that and try to be somebody else, I won't produce who I am, and even the things I do produce will suffer, and I'm not marketing animals that reflect who I am. And maybe I'm just not marketing animals at all. Maybe you're one of those people that's just not marketing. Oh, you're carrying your cows to a market, but you're not marketing your cows. You're not selling your calves. You're not adding value to someone else. Because if the only way you add value is through them buying your calf in a ring, they're not getting the value that's on the inside of you. I can guarantee you that. In no way are you adding value to that animal, and more importantly, in no way are you adding value to that buyer, whether it be at a sale barn or anywhere else, if you aren't connected to that animal. They just think they're really good at picking calves. They don't know you. They don't know that you added any value to them. And let's be honest, none of them care if you make it. It's not their job to. The world doesn't owe you a thing to make your farm successful. But you know what will make them care? Is if you add value to them. That's not just the cattle industry. This is the way the world works. Nobody cares about you unless they think you care about them. If you've added value to that animal you've developed and they are able to recognize that, now we've got something that people will invest in. They'll invest their time, they'll invest their resource, they'll invest money, they'll invest all kinds of things because now they're investing in you. They're not just buying a commodity to flip and finish or do whatever with. They're not just going to Walmart and buying another tool. And even that's not even the best analogy, because when you go to buy tools, the guys that know, they're buying specific brands because that brand has a value to them. They're not just buying the cheapest tool in the store. They're going to buy a specific brand. And I guarantee you there's plenty of money out there in the world to buy your value if you market it. This has been another episode of Shooting the Bull. I'm Ken Hendricks. Thanks for listening. Thanks for shooting the bull. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so that you can get all the latest updates.